Hello everyone, my name is Enton Eller and I'm your technical host for today's presentation. So I'm glad to welcome all of you here, and I'm hoping that a few more people will still be able to join us in the moments before we actually get going. I have a few housekeeping items before we begin. Most of you have found out that in the upper left-hand side, my camera's reversed, so I have to make sure I do that right. There's the chat window where we've been greeting you, and we hope that you'll take the time to post your comments and questions for our presenter there. Directly above me are the list of all the webcasts that we've been doing so far. Of course, today we're looking forward to Gail Adcock's presentation on family ministry, but there's a whole lot of other recordings as well as other webinars. Yet to come.
Thank you, Anton. It's so good to have everyone join us today from wherever you are connecting to by way of internet. We just wish you a warm and rich welcome to today's webinar. The webinar, Family Ministry, is part of our Family Matters webinar series. And today our presenter is Gail Adcock. And Gail is going to be sharing with us how family ministry has seen an unprecedented rise in the church over recent years in both the UK and the United States. And it's seen an increasing number of workers and congregations are seeking more holistic ways of working with parents, children, and young people. And so the webinar today will consider the current shape and formation of family ministry, and while exploring various methods taken to engage with families. Gail will reflect on ways to develop and support family ministry in our context in the future, and with particular reference to how the church can stand alongside families as they face the challenges of today's society. It is a privilege to introduce to you Gail Adcock. She is the Family Ministry Development Officer with the Methodist Church UK. She trained initially as a primary school teacher before becoming a family pastor, serving 10 years at a Baptist church, where she had development and oversight responsibilities for children and youth ministry, as well as the on-site children's center, providing services to families and the local community. And so it's such a great pleasure to introduce to you Gail and to invite her to present to you. Gail, please join us. Thank you.
Hello everyone, hi. It's really good to be here, and thank you Stan for such a great introduction and for just really kind of setting the tone, I suppose, for what we're going to be thinking about tonight. We're going to be looking obviously at family ministry, and we're going to just take a bit of a kind of a meander in lots of ways around this whole subject. We could probably spend a good day, frankly, exploring many of these issues, and we've got an hour, so we're going to have hopefully a good time just to unpack this topic a little bit more. As Stan mentioned, I have experienced huge amounts of work and ministry with families over the years. I was reflecting actually earlier that I have seen a shift happen probably in the last 10 to 15 years, where there has been this movement into doing work more holistically with families. I find that fascinating, really interesting, and something which I'm really glad to see happening across the church. So let's get started. I think the best place for us to start really is to think about actually what is family ministry, and it's one of those terms that's quite hard to define in many ways, and if you go looking for a definition you will probably struggle to find the same one anywhere. And I spent lots of time reading in various places trying to see if there is a universal description of what family ministry is, and yet there doesn't appear to be one size that fits all as such. So the one which I'm going to start with us for tonight is from Diana Garland. It was in her book Family Ministry, A Comprehensive Guide. Diana offers this definition. So she says, family ministry consists of any activity of a church or church representatives that directly or indirectly, 1, develops faith families in the congregational community, 2, increases the Christ-likeness of the family relationships of Christians, and or equips and supports Christians who use their families as a channel of ministry to others. So this is what Diana has to say. That was her suggestion of what family ministry is. And her perspective is very much one which looks at this work from a ministry perspective, where we're talking about growing faith, we're talking about discipleship, we're talking about helping people grow as they follow Jesus together. And perhaps one of the things which it doesn't seem to encompass is the idea actually that ministry is much wider than that, that perhaps talking in ministry terms is quite narrow, but we can widen it out because it includes things such as support with children and young people. That also there's often a very practical edge to the work that we're doing with families and households. And it's not just solely about spiritual development, it encompasses other aspects of life as well. And perhaps many of us would also recognise that there is a strong missional edge to the work that we do. And perhaps there's a suggestion of that in what Garland says when she talks about supports Christians who use their families as a channel of ministry to others. So perhaps there is this missional edge to what she's suggesting there about how as a family we can seek to encourage others to explore what it means to know God and follow him. So that's a place to start, to help us work towards a clearer picture of what work with families looks like. We can perhaps explore some of the common markers of this type of work, recognising that family ministry goes beyond perhaps narrow definitions of just married parents and children, or what perhaps is viewed as a traditional or a nuclear family. Society has changed. People's lifestyles have also changed. Our working patterns have changed as well. Households come today in a variety of forms. Families are often biological, but there are often now other kinds of families that we're meeting and encountering a lot of the time. So for instance, we may be meeting with blended families or step families, as some of us might know them. So there's all kinds of different forms of family which we're meeting and engaging with in the work that we're doing. So I just want to take a little look at some statistics from the UK, and it'll be interesting to see whether or not this resonates with those of you who are in other parts of the world, who are particularly perhaps in the US. So back in 2011, the last UK census data mentions some interesting changes that have happened. One of the changes was something called a concealed family, and this is a new development here in the UK, this idea that actually we have households and families within families. And so within one home there may be a family living with another family. So for instance, the children of a parental couple perhaps who are living there, they may be married or not married, they may have children, not have children, but they're living in a multi-generational household. Lots of reasons in the UK why this might be the case, not least perhaps because of economic factors, people perhaps struggling to buy or rent a home for themselves and are choosing to live in a household with other people as one way perhaps to save money. So concealed families, that's a new occurrence here in the UK. There's also a shift towards increasing numbers of 20 to 34-year-olds remaining at home. Once upon a time, perhaps a couple of decades ago or earlier even, that age group, the people in their 20s, would have definitely been looking to move away from home. They would have gone to university or to college. They would have got a job. they would have perhaps married or moved in and lived with a partner. And these days we're finding that more and more young people are actually remaining at home in the family home with parents, with other family members, and fewer and fewer are actually setting out to establish their own families at that stage of life. And it's interesting that this seems to reflect the sense that adolescence and youth, in fact, is growing. That band of young people who are in that bracket are becoming a larger group, and youth is lasting for longer. It doesn't perhaps end at the end of the teenage years, but it's something that continues into the 20s, and now it seems even into people's 30s. So some interesting developments happening there as well. And also there are changes within employment rates for men and women. In terms of sort of gender differences, this has been a continual shift over the past few decades. Rates of employed women continue to rise, and the rate for men actually has decreased in the UK. So more and more women are in full-time work or in part-time employment, whereas the numbers of men is decreasing. I think there's an indication there of how parents, particularly in the UK, are looking to provide childcare for children. It's a joint enterprise now. People are wanting to try and manage that as a couple. It's not solely the woman's responsibility anymore to be at home providing care for children, but actually it's a shared responsibility. So fathers are playing more of a role in that, and statistics are showing us that men and women are changing their working patterns to try and ensure that they can do what's necessary and needed at home. So in light of those things, we need to embrace a wider idea of where family is found, and that goes perhaps beyond boundaries of parents with young children. Often family ministry, particularly in the UK, seems to be focused very much on families where there are children under 5, and yet there are some interesting developments around sort of working with families and teenagers and wanting to take an approach which involves older children. And in fact also as we recognise as people are living longer, as they're growing older, that family life changes, that there is development in family life. There are different seasons of family life, and so people are perhaps experiencing family in different ways as time progresses. And family ministry is sort of gently moving in this direction, and it's an interesting thing to observe. In the UK, we have a phrase, the empty nesters. We talk about parents who children have left home, and this is an age group of people perhaps who are still perhaps middle-aged, who have a great deal of life to live, and it's fascinating really to see that there is a desire to sort of embrace perhaps people in that age group and what they have to offer, particularly for families with younger children, in terms of providing support and guidance and advice for them as they set out as families. So each of those households, if we reflect on all the different kinds that we know of, that we've encountered, perhaps people who are our friends and our neighbours, people in our communities, also the people that we work with, that we may know through church life, through church activities, there's a change happening there, so that there are more kinds of families that we're meeting. And it's important for us to focus work, to focus ministry, bearing that in mind, recognising that family is different now, and so the ways in which we support people, the way in which we nurture family life, that we encourage families to have a sense of well-being, about what it means to be a family, that ministry encompasses that ministry seeks to explore what that looks like. So at this point, I've been talking for a while. It would be great just to hear from you, so I'm going to invite Stan to come back and join us for a moment. Just perhaps, how do you identify maybe with some of those things? Does that resonate with you? Does it strike a chord? Is that something that we've seen in our own experience?
Hi, Gail. Wonderful insights. And just want to get into a couple of comments that have been made. I think people are resonating with the statistics and the information you shared. Jackie makes a comment and a question. She says, people struggle with the concept of family ministry. They say, who is not in a family? She asked that as a question. And would you like to say more about that?
I think that everybody in some shape or form is in a family, and whether that's a biological family, whether it's even in a family which is together because of sort of legal, such as through marriage, that there's relationships that exist there with different people. It goes beyond that, though. We're looking really at sort of biblical models around households and clans, and people may be living in the same household and experiencing family with one another because they live in close proximity. So family is changing. Whether in the church we are really up to speed with that and grappling with it in the way that we should do is an entirely different question.
It seems like when we think of family within the church context, it seems like we limit and we look at people who are a part of our church community and we say, do they have a family here? If so, they have a family. If not, maybe they're single or maybe family is elsewhere. We don't look at the larger picture. We just tend to see who is part of our church community, and unfortunately then we redefine or too narrowly defined family. Is that is that assessment that is applicable, or?
I think there's a lot of truth in that, and I think that in my experience, as church we may look and think, well, that person who is part of our church community is a single person, has family elsewhere, but we're not really looking at how can we provide a sense of family for them within our church congregation. Where do they experience that? Where do they find that? Our family is part of a missional community called a hub, and within that missional community, we've got couples without children. It's mainly families with teenage children because that was kind of our hope was to gather people in that group. But we've got people without children. We've got single people. And our hope is that everybody who comes experiences a sense of family with us, that there's that sense of we're going to meet, we're going to eat together, we're going to spend time catching up. And everybody goes home at the end of the evening feeling somebody has noticed me, someone has recognised who I am, I've been welcomed into this group of people. I think we need to be working harder at trying to do
that valuing of relationships. Eleanor makes a comment. If family is defined too narrowly, people can feel excluded. Those without children or empty nesters depends on how the church culture understands family, which is something that we just raised as well. Is there additional thoughts you'd like to share with that?
No, I think that's very true, and I think people particularly in those two groups that Ellen has mentioned really struggle often. And I think my eldest son's heading off to university later this year. In a few years' time, our children will hopefully be independent, and we'll have an empty nest. And I hope that the church will still be a place where we're able to experience family. But I'm not sure that that's really part of our culture at the moment.
And then let's just get to these two comments, and then we'll resume with your presentation. Anton responds to Jackie, I wonder if it's also ministering to the family unit in relationships, not just individuals. And then Anita, I think the value of family ministry is that people, young and old, grow better in faith when they work as a team and learn together. And this could also apply to groups of friends in the church. And would you care to comment on that, on Anita's statement?
That's a great. Anita, that's absolutely what I would want to say, that we need to be exploring more opportunities where younger and older people can gather and have faith together, because I think there's lots that we can learn from one another. I think there's lots of scope to do that. Whether we've sort of come across the best way or the ideal way of doing it, I'm not sure we're there.
Okay. Well, I'm going to give you space to return to your presentation. Thank you, Gail.
Thank you. Okay. Great comments. Thank you, everybody. It's great to read you engaging with what we're talking about. So let's move on and think a bit perhaps about what the features of family ministry that we currently view being exhibited are. What are those aspects that we see in the work that we're involved in, that we may see happening around us in the churches that we're part of? So I want to run through 5 things which I would say I recognise, and there are certainly things which you can come across talks about also across the family ministry field. So let's begin with the fact that family ministry is very much a contextual piece of work. It's a contextual way of doing ministry. It's shaped by the context that is being worked in. It's shaped by the people who live there. It's shaped by the geography of that place. It's shaped by the location, what happens there, what work people do, what the different age groups are like, what activities people enjoy doing. And family ministry needs to be relevant to that group of people. There is definitely a move towards wanting to look at the community that a church is in, where it's seeking to do family ministry, and asking the question, okay, if this is our context, what does our work therefore look like? What is our ministry if this is the place where we find ourselves? And it's all very well thinking, actually, we could do this, we could do that, we could organise something over here, but actually what we really need is a very sound understanding of the context that we're working in. And it's really important and worthwhile to spend time exploring that, studying it, finding out about what's happening locally, so that we tailor the work that we're doing, so that ministry has a really good fit for the community and the neighbourhoods that we're part of. Over here in the Methodist Church up in the north east, a small village church in Market Weighton up near Hull was recognising that actually they were quite an elderly congregation, and they decided that they wanted to try and explore doing ministry with parents and children and families. And they noticed that actually parents often at the start of the school day had dropped off their children at the school next door and were standing around outside. And those parents were asked one day, if we opened up our church building, would you like to come in and have a cup of tea? The parents responded really positively to that. They were really excited at the prospect and said, yeah, we'd love to come in. That would be fabulous, but you need to give us toast as well. So Market Weighton, for about the past 5-6 years, has opened up its building for something called Tea and Toast every week. Welcomes in those parents, families. It's a really thriving place now where families can meet and gather with one another. But the key thing was that they looked and explored perhaps what the local need was. And even for them as a small rural congregation, there were still possibilities. It didn't take a huge amount of sort of budget in order for them to be able to do that. The second one, let's move on and think about what intergenerational means for family ministry. And this perhaps refers to some of the comments as well that were made a few moments ago. We have seen an era of church ministry which has been very much about age-specific ministry. We've had silo ministry happening. So we do superb work with children, we work with young people. I've also experienced superb work with early years, with children under 5. And that has been superbly and professionally done. And I think what we're experiencing now is a desire to explore what does it mean actually when we all come together as a whole church family. If we're seeking to be one church, one body, what does that look like for us? And this idea of how we be different generations, how we come together, explore being intergenerational, which means generations engaging with one another, not just solely participating perhaps in worship services alongside. but how do those generations actually meaningfully engage with one another is a really big question that we need to explore further right now. It's quite fascinating to see that some of perhaps the recent developments where we've heard things from talking about sticky faith and actually how do young people remain as Christians as they get older. Some of that mentions about the importance of having other people within the church engage with them so they feel part of that community. And that's something which I think we need to look at a bit. I think there's some work perhaps that Karen Marie Eustace has done on that, where she talks about real faith and real families and real children. So that's intergenerational work. We also want to think about being relational. Family ministry, from what I've seen, is very much based on the importance placed on relationships. We need to get to know the people that we're working with. We need to get to know those families, what their lives look like, what they do for a living, what their interests are, what their backgrounds are like. All of this is vital in order to be able to work authentically and genuinely with people. So we develop this sense of a shared understanding of life, of the challenges that life presents, of some of the struggles and the joys that we have as we seek to raise children, as our children grow up and become teenagers, or perhaps as we're not able to have children. And we want to provide an environment where people are able to explore those things, those issues and concerns with one another, because they know there is valued and trusted relationship there. So there need to be regular points of contact, but those points of contact where we meet and get to know people need to be places where we can go below the surface. So it's not just about kind of learning the stuff which is sort of superficial, which is very easy to get to know with one another, but it's also about going beyond that and learning actually what are the things which really make us tick, what are the struggles that we're really having, what are the things that impact us that we perhaps don't feel able to easily talk and share with other people. And that's how deeper relationship is able to grow. That's where the space emerges, where we can perhaps discuss faith. We can introduce the idea of what it means to know God, who God is, how he makes a difference and impacts on our lives. And it's within that whole arena then of relationship that those conversations take place. We also want to recognise that family ministry is practical. There is that element to it which is very much about seeing and understanding what practical needs people have and how we can meet those. It's to do with, isn't it, really, what Paul talks about when he says, sometimes we might use words, but actually actions are really important, and it's key for us to be able to demonstrate God's love for people as well as telling them about it. So recognising ways in which we can actually practically and physically support people is very key. Over here in the UK, that has often meant that there have been food banks set up if people are struggling financially. People know that they can be referred there, they can go and pick up some groceries, they can be fed at a very fundamental level, have their needs met. And it's good for the church to be in a place where it's able to provide that kind of care and support. And then finally, of course, a feature of family ministry is the spiritual dimension. And that's a really important part. This is concerned really with faith formation in families. It's concerned with helping families to grow in faith with one another, helping parents, children, young people to explore how they follow Jesus. Actually, what does it mean to be a Christian? How do we walk alongside each other, alongside God together? How do we recognise that even very young children have faith and a spiritual dimension to life? How do we encourage that and encourage it to nurture and grow and develop so that we can learn from one another and build up one another's faith? I think there's a sense there actually that that's something which has been neglected in the UK. Perhaps we've been used to outsourcing a lot of the spiritual care of children and young people, and there's a place really for the church to rediscover what does it mean for us to be supporting and encouraging families as they seek to live out faith with one another, sort of for those 6 days a week where they're not in a church, they're not in a worship meeting with each other. How can we encourage them to be doing that day in, day out through school and college and all the other things and work that they're involved in? So I've just talked us through 5 things there, and again we'll have a little moment here just to stop and think. Are those features things part of the work that you're involved with? Do you see that, Stan? Would you like to come and join us? We can look at some of these comments.
This segment has created a lot of interaction about intergenerational and generational ministries, and it seems like we're moving as a church from that corporate kind of silo structure of church ministries, recognizing the importance of spirituality. And Bob raised that earlier when he asked, are you suggesting a new paradigm moving from the segregated children and adults?
I would advocate that quite wholeheartedly, actually. I think we have siloed and segregated for long enough. I think we need to be exploring new ways, actually, of bringing different generations together. I think we need to rediscover some of what that means, and that's, of course, full of challenges. There are all kinds of sort of issues in terms of how people engage with church life, how people like to worship. But I think ultimately there are many things to be gained from seeking to do that.
The comments that you made on the points on being contextual, intergenerational, created some comments. Jackie shares that doing those kinds of things means being vulnerable, and that we're not coming off as the experts on what it is to do family ministry, that it's a real learning experience.
Yeah, absolutely. People, I think there's sometimes a perception, if people know that you're a Christian, if you're part of the church, that somehow that must mean that you have life sorted, that you are living a fairly ideal existence, and yet we know very well that we're not immune to struggles and difficulties and stresses of life. So I think the more we're able to live life with people in the thick of it, being very incarnational in our work, I think that really bears fruit in the long term.
I wonder if sometimes we kind of portray this arrogance by saying, just forthright saying, well, the Bible has all the answers. And so then people begin to make this assumption that, well, we're just a bunch of arrogant people who think, well, if you just turn to the Bible, you'll find all your answers. And so we have nothing to learn from you.
And we know that that's not true. We know that there's an awful lot to learn from other people. I think one of our joys in our hub, in our missional community, is that we get to sort of bump up against one another, and we arrive on a Friday evening after a long week. Often, people are tired, and you get to kind of see how life really is, and that's really important. It's not about sort of, I suppose, putting on our faith masks in some way and trying to make out that we have everything sorted.
There's a number of good comments about, Katie makes the statement, it takes a church to raise and support a family in every aspect of its life in the course of faith. Other people have touched on the messy church as being a good paradigm as a model. Rachel shares that they have found a cafe-style services have encouraged old and young to share ideas. And perhaps you could touch on some of these ideas that people are sharing in the chat box.
Yeah, sure. I think Messy Church is probably a very well-known one. I'm not sure how well folk over in the US will know about Messy Church. Are you aware of it?
Yes, we are. We just had a webinar on Messy Church.
Oh. Excellent. It's really thriving over here in the UK, and I think that's in part due to the fact that people are wanting to explore being family together, actually. and actually where in church life is that opportunity. And I think that's Messy Church is very easy to be part of. It is by its name, messy, it's noisy, it's busy, there's lots going on. The Messy Church that I used to be part of in my previous role was a fabulous gathering of all kinds of different people. And I think that's quite rare in society today, that there is that opportunity to gather with people in that way. I can't think of any other context where you could have those different age groups, different generations, getting together and spending that time. So I think Messy Church is growing in a really fabulous way, and I'm excited to see what God does with that. I'm interested to know more about the cafe style services.
Yeah, if Rachel could perhaps share a bit more in the chat box, and we'll give her a chance to do that. You're being affirmed for the touching on the deeper relationships that are important, and as Joe shares that they found in befriending parents and other people and discussing their faith and bringing children. And then Anita makes a good point. She says it's interesting that churches are thinking of doing things more together, whereas in our culture, people seem to be gravitating more to interest groups of similar age.
Yeah, that's a really interesting comment, isn't it? I assume there that Anita, you're talking about actually that perhaps people are engaged in sporting activities, that they want to be doing things because they've got that in common. I know sort of over here in the UK that football or soccer would be one of those things that might be a similar thing. So I think it's important to recognise actually that an interest group can be a great way actually of exploring faith if you wanted to have a missional edge. I know of a missional community that had a sports leaning, that was a part of its life, and it wasn't solely about participating in sport, it was also about enjoying sport together, watching sport together, and so I think those are definitely things worth exploring. Yeah.
Well, perhaps we'll be able to hear more in a little bit from Rachel regarding the cafe style. But Gail, let's go back to your presentation.
Okay. Sorry, Rachel, I put you on the spot there. Rather, I'm sorry about that. Okay, so I think having thought and looked at those 5 different strands, perhaps we might want to call them, we can move on and think really about the fact that there are perhaps challenges in bringing those things together. And if you are a family ministry practitioner, that trying to draw those threads into the work that we're doing can often prove tricky in some shape or form. How are we able to embed spiritual practices into the wider work of ministry? How are we able to reflect faith perhaps in the everyday? If we're really looking towards building a more holistic approach to ministry, so we're talking about something which involves different age groups, it's wanting to engage with the community and not solely be church focused. If we want it to be more integrated into the whole of life, how do we really go about doing that? Perhaps also in our approaches in our missional activity, bringing together different church congregations, those who are participating perhaps in our toddler groups, people who've got under 5-year-old children. Perhaps how do we help them to explore faith and the big questions that they may be having of life? Where do we start if that's what we're seeking to do? So I would suggest a few things. I think it's really key to identify the possibilities. And of course, the possibilities are often endless. So that's a matter of sitting down, of praying, of reflecting, of talking to others who are trusted, perhaps colleagues or companions, and asking them about really what are we going to prioritise in the community, in the church that we are part of. What does this community need of us that we could perhaps offer? And that's looking at the opportunities really that are around. It's also bearing in mind what the strengths and gifts are of people perhaps in that congregation that you find yourself a part of. And all of that is obviously done with a very prayerful approach. We want to be of a mind that God is already at work. God is doing what he does wonderfully, gloriously in the places where we find ourselves, and we want to join him in that work. We're not sort of jumping in and inviting him to join us. We want to go and be where he is and working with him. So we want to know, what is God saying about this community, about this place, about these people, and how can we best be involved in trying to minister to them? So it's very much really thinking from the perspective of God's kingdom. So if God is in this place, how can we help the kingdom to grow? What are the things that we could be doing which will be encouraging this? Secondly, we want to think about actually how do we go about setting some goals for the work that we're doing. So we want to perhaps be reflecting on what are the outcomes of this work that we would like to see. Perhaps what direction would we perhaps like to see families move in? How would we like to encourage them to grow, to develop? What are the things that they are going to be needing of us in order to get there? So we can start by setting some goals and thinking a bit about what we would like to achieve. Now, there's actually a diagram in Diana Garland's book, A Comprehensive Guide to Family Ministry. If you look on page 543 of the 2012 edition, you can find a superb diagram. I didn't include it here because it's got actually quite a lot of words on it. But if you look at that diagram, she is reflecting on the idea of actually thinking, who are we working with and what are we hoping to achieve? And it's a matrix which allows a practitioner to be thinking about the different goals, the different aims for working with different groups of people. And of course, if we work with a larger group, that will have particular aims perhaps. If we're working with smaller groups, if there are particular families, particular people that we're concerned, actually we really want to try and look at ways in which we can minister towards them, they will need some different goals. And that diagram very helpfully helps us to think really about what might those things look like. So just to reiterate, that book is Diana Garland, which is a Comprehensive Guide to Family Ministry. It's a really weighty tome, but I would really heartily recommend that you get a copy, because she explores all kinds of the topics and issues that are really vital for us to have engaged with if we're working in this field. And then we also want to actually think about the fact that we don't want to leap immediately to implementing programs. We've experienced an era of work where programs have really driven a lot of ministry in churches, and programs are often useful. They can be a great tool to the work that we're doing, but we need to perhaps resist leaping into a program immediately, or assuming that perhaps a program is going to be able to provide all the answers that we're looking for, that we're trying to explore. There are all kinds of things that we can use. It's superb that if you are running a messy church, there are lots and lots of resources out there that you can use to run that. Messy Church is superb in offering suggestions, in helping people to shape their messy churches as they plan and do them. And that will be really useful in many contexts, but perhaps in your one, you'll need to do something different. And it's about really kind of having, being really well tuned in to where you are to know what is going to work best there. So I would suggest that perhaps somebody who's done some thinking about this is Mark de Vries. I've recently been reading his family-based youth ministry book. I think we're looking to explore a bit more about what it means to do ministry with young people and their families. And he talks a lot about this idea that particularly in youth work, it's been very program driven, and the desire to explore different ways of doing ministry, which doesn't necessarily revolve around implementing and sort of assuming that a program is going to be the right way to engage with young people. So he says some interesting things in his book. He talks as well about actually the importance of looking for opportunities to be intergenerational. he is an advocate in what he says there about providing mentors, for trying to provide that sense of extended family for people, particularly if young people are engaging with church without their biological family. So that returns us really to some of what we talked about earlier, which was thinking about what does intergenerational church look like? What does extended family look like within the church? How can we foster and adopt people within that church community so we experience that sense of being brothers and sisters in Christ? So yeah, 3 things there, just about identifying possibilities, setting some goals, and perhaps just pausing before leaping into implementing a programme. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about some work in the West Midlands, and I'm really thrilled actually that Jo Yare is online with us tonight. Jo is one of the workers in the Vale of Stour circuit. I've had the pleasure of getting to know her and her colleague Rachel, who are workers in that area, and learning about the sort of journey that they've been on as they've sought to work with families and to try and sort of explore how they can encourage faith to be engaged with in their context. And for them, baptism has been a really key focus. There's been a sense of perhaps families wanting to baptise or christen their children. They've been engaged in church activities. They've asked the question, actually, how do I go about my child being christened or baptised? And because of that question, it's raised all kinds of other things and opportunities that they've been able to explore. So there's been opportunities to ask big questions, to explore more of what faith means when they've got people together. Jo and Rachel run these baptism discovery evenings where they invite people to one of their church halls, because they work in a number of churches. They offer them loads of cake and cups of tea and coffee. They make it a really welcoming and hospitable evening, and people can come in, they bring their children. There's lots of sort of fun and noise and chat and discussion during that time, and the welcome in that is really, really key. And that's all part of how they've been able to develop ongoing relationships with people. And they've developed some very deep relationships with families, with parents in that place, and people have got to know who they are, and have, particularly through their sort of Facebook contacts, through social media, been able to offer to pray for people, to kind of just offer support to people in other ways than perhaps just purely through face-to-face contact. One of the things which, when I met with them recently, there are some photos here on the PowerPoint from one of their baptism discovery evenings, which show that there's cake and there are drinks on the table. It's very informal. People are chatting to one another. There is fun. There is kind of laughter. They also put out bits and pieces on the tables for people, such as books, leaflets. They give sort of sweets. There's just all kinds of interesting things which just help people to go away with a sense of we welcome you. You are welcome here. And I think some of the responses, Jo might be able to give us some comments about this. But people are often surprised by that warmth that they experience and encounter when they come along to those baptism discovery evenings. Back in January, they hosted a kind of reunion. They got lots of the families together and hosted it on a Sunday morning, which would typically be a morning when families would be gathering as part of church congregations. Instead of being in church, they hired a soft play area. So I'm assuming that you have places like this over in the States where you can take your children, they can run around, they can climb, they can have lots of fun and enjoy themselves. They hosted the reunion on a Sunday morning in this soft play place. They had all these families, I think around 120 people came and joined them. A couple of their ministers came along, there was face painting. But they provided a way to be church which was different to normal. It wasn't about saying, here are we as the church, come to us. It was about saying on a Sunday morning we know that many of these families will be out in a soft play place. And so actually we want to go and join them where they are. And it's really exciting to hear and see what Joe and Rachel are up to there, how they're seeking to be very much God's eyes and ears and to be with him in the thick of family life in that place. So I think that probably brings us to the close of this section. Again, if we would like to just pause if there are reflections on any of that, if any of you disagree with me about the idea of programs, you may want to recommend some good programs. But yeah, just be interested to hear some of your thoughts and reflections.
Well, Gail,
Hi, Stan.
Rachel has had an opportunity to just share a bit more about the cafe style service. And she shares that they set up 12 tables, creating a sense of family around each table. So whether you come alone or part of a group, you become a part of a team family. And then they have different activities throughout the service, which enables family tables to work together. And you can see there that she wrote her favorite experience was the seeds on a sheet of paper that asked people to work. Yeah, really creative. So that gives you an idea. So perhaps, Gail, for yourself, that evokes some ideas of other experiences that you've seen or that you've created yourself. Some other models.
Yeah, I love that idea actually that Rachel's used the language of team there. And we often refer to ourselves as a team Adcock in our household. And actually that gives scope for other people to feel part of a family, doesn't it? If we're talking about team, that's quite helpful language perhaps to be using. I think there are similar things which I've come across where people are gathering in that way. I think often those occasions, what I'm discovering, they're often focused around food and eating together. That's a key principle within Messy Church, that we sit down and we eat and just enjoy that time really with each other. Food is often at the heart of these things. It's something I suppose that we all have in common, that we all do, and it's quite a useful way to gather people around. So that's really interesting, yeah.
Jackie makes an excellent point where she says programs are the outside packing, and they're okay as long as the relationships are there, the love, and maybe are adapted for the context. Here in the States, we've been running off of this idea, build it and they will come. And I think is becoming a myth, and I think what Jackie is saying is you can build it, but if the other aspects are not there, it won't happen.
No, absolutely. I think we can often set up sort of a 6-week course, or we can put something in place and say come and invite people. We can do a really good job of promoting something, of letting people know, of giving out leaflets and reminding them about it, but people don't then come. And I think often one of the issues perhaps in there is that there just isn't that sense of relationship. People don't see the purpose perhaps, but they also haven't got that personal contact, which means that they want to come because they know that they'll see so-and-so, that there'll be these other people that they know of that they can gather with and enjoy time with. So every program that I've ever used has required a degree of sort of adjusting or tweaking because it needs to be relevant to the people that are being worked with. I think it's impossible really to pick something off the shelf and just do it perhaps as a book tells you to. I think those things always need to be adapted depending on who the group are.
Yeah. Eleanor makes a comment, interesting to see how in the soft play church ideas there is differentiation rather than segregation of ages. It's important sometimes to do something to enable us parents to have a distraction-free time to formulate a thought or finish our sentence. Any comment that you'd like?
I think that's often the quest, isn't it, when you have young children of actually when can you finish something? I think that's a rare occurrence with small children. I think what I particularly liked about that event was that it's a personal decision in that about how people are able to engage. You can be fairly perhaps anonymous if you want to. You can just come along. Your children can have a good time. You may speak to other people, but the level at which you engage is entirely up to you. And I know that Joe and Rachel and the ministers would have made a lot of effort to speak to people, to welcome them, so that they knew that they were glad to see them. But I think people can choose, and I think that's really key, that there's no pressure. We're not sort of planning an event in a way which means that people have to talk, they have to answer questions, that there's so much structure that people start to feel slightly terrified. There's a level of informality which help people just to engage. I think that's a very similar model to Messy Church. I think that's one of the reasons it's so successful, is that there's enough structure there that people feel comfortable, that they can get stuck in and involved, but also that they are free to move around and do what they want to do. They don't feel put on the spot.
And then let's get to one last question. Then I'll invite you to share your final, your closing thoughts. Robert Moore shares, does our church furniture get in the way of ministry? Pews, pulpits, no food or drink attitude in the sanctuary.
What a great question, Robert. I have to confess I'm a serial offender at having food and drinks in the sanctuary. When I was involved in family ministry in my previous role, we were forever doing that, and often getting ourselves into trouble with the amount of glitter that was around the building and all those sorts of things. But it's a really difficult one, isn't it? Because you want to respect that for many people, they see that as a holy space. But actually, we don't want that to become something that hinders people to participating and joining with us. Our spaces need to be welcoming, and sometimes, I think unfortunately it is true, furniture does get in the way. If we can find a way around that, if we can move things, fantastic. I think if we work with sort of people in our buildings who are understanding of the purposes and goals of what we're doing, that often really helps smooth those things through.
And then Gail, I'll just step away for a minute for you to close with final thoughts.
Okay. So this hour has really flown by. We've talked about a number of things. We've talked about the fact that it's very difficult to define family ministry. I think that that's actually one of the joys of it, because it's so diverse. It takes different forms in different places with different people at different times. That's one of the beauties of it, but it makes it difficult for us as practitioners to actually pin down what it actually is. We've thought a little bit about the changes in family life, in household life, in what family looks like today in the 21st century. I think those changes are going to continue, and we need to be conscious of that in the work that we're doing. We looked at those 5 features of family ministry. So we thought about context, the importance of gathering different generations, the role that relationship has to play in our work, and that also there's a practical element, and we mustn't forget that there's the spiritual dimension in our work as well. And then finally, we thought about approach, and that often it's important to approach our work by thinking firstly about what are the possibilities and the opportunities, that we seek to prioritise those, that we don't seem to want to do everything, that perhaps we look to partner with other places, and also that perhaps we don't necessarily assume that a programme is going to be the right way forward for us, that we explore other ways perhaps of doing ministry. It's been a real pleasure to be with you here this evening, and I'm looking forward to just having a read through of your comments and just hearing some of your reflections on this evening. Thank you.
Well, Gail, thank you so much. It has been a real privilege to have you with us today and to present on this really powerful topic for the life of the community of faith. And to everyone that attended here today, we appreciate your participation. The questions, the comments have been so good, and we deeply appreciate your support. I'm going to invite Anton in for a moment to do a wrap-up with some wrap-up information. And Anton?
Thanks, Dan. I'll just take a moment to say I have 2 quick polls that I would appreciate you giving us some feedback. The first question is, how helpful was the presentation or Gail's content and learning? And the second is, how well did this webinar format work for you? Additionally, those of you with the Church of the Brethren, if you wish to obtain continuing education units for participation, The instructions are there, and I'll post a live link in the chat window. So thank you all. And Stan and Gail, back to you. But Gail, let me say it's been a joy working with you. Thank you so much for your presentation today.
Thank you, Anton. Thank you, Stan. It's been a pleasure to do this evening, and just for us to be community online with one another and have an opportunity to talk about some of these things. There's much more, I'm sure, that we could unpack. Hopefully there'll be an opportunity in the future to reflect further on some of these topics.
I would like that, and I think the folks that have attended today as well would enjoy that as well. And everybody's bringing their experiences and their questions, and so that just makes this so much richer. Gail, we're going to let you go because we know you have a commitment, a travel commitment, and so we just want to say again, thank you so much for everything. And your presentation, the content was so rich. And for everyone that was attending today, wherever your home is and your faith community, we wish you blessings and thank you for being with us today. Thank you and good day or good night. Bye-bye.
Bye.